Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Truth and Liberty. Did you know that it has never been easier to hear the gospel than it is today in this age? When I was a kid, I should say when I first became a Christian, there was no such thing as the internet. The only broadcasting we had was radio and television, traditional television. There was a Christian network at the time called TBN. It's still around today, and there might have been one or two others, and some Christian radio networks. But there seemed to be a clear line between Christian TV and non-religious programming. I go to a variety of events and conferences around the country, but one of the most enjoyable that I go to is the National Religious Broadcasters Conference. NRB is what we call it. I'll always remember the first time I walked into the NRB exhibit hall. I saw row after row of ministries and organizations of all sizes and all kinds, with radio, television, digital, other internet-based broadcasters, and the myriad of businesses and ministries that support them and use them. I was so impressed, but also so encouraged. What I saw was a mighty arsenal of powerful weapons in the hand of God, proclaiming the gospel, speaking the truth to our nation and to the world. The National Religious Broadcasters was formed as an association in the 1940s when preaching of the gospel started to happen on radio around the country. And it was formed to fight for the freedom of Christians to proclaim the good news over the airwaves. NRB has since then grown tremendously, and it's united Christian broadcasters for decades and helped preserve that freedom. But folks, let's not think for a minute that the threat of losing our first freedom, religious liberty, is permanently resolved. It's not like we can sit back in our easy chair and say, well, I'm glad we got that one taken care of. Our spiritual enemy fights and strives every single day to silence the gospel. And his followers, as the Bible refers to them as the children of disobedience, the followers of the devil. Can we just talk like that? Can we please start, speaking Bible speak now? We could call them leftists. We could call them this. We could call them Democrats. But really, it's everyone who doesn't have a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, who isn't in Christ. Satan works through them. And he works through them to support policies like infringing freedom of speech, infringing freedom of religion, trans, LGBT, Marxism, and on and on and on. Well, the followers of the devil, they don't know they're following the devil, but they want nothing more than to silence the church, right? The Gospel of John, it says that when Jesus came, his own received him not, right? It says he bore witness to the truth, but they didn't want to hear the truth because their deeds were evil. Isn't that how it is? When you're asleep in a dark room, you don't like it when someone turns the light on. But when we see this fight happening over freedom and religious freedom in America, this struggle plays out in the headlines every single day. Political correctness, hate speech, the laws, outlawing so-called hate speech. Compelled speech. Oh, you have to tell people about their abortion rights. Name calling, hate, and now violence trying to suppress us. A few weeks ago, Charlie Kirk was murdered. In the eyes, visible for the whole world to see. His death, his murder is all the proof we need that our freedom to proclaim Jesus is under constant threat. And these things shouldn't surprise us, though, should they? Right? We can't let them shake us. We can't let them discourage us. Jesus told us and warned us in John 15, verse 18 through 20, if the world hate you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of this world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Remember the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my saying, they will keep yours also. You know, the fact that we suffer persecution and opposition and censorship doesn't mean, though, that we should passively allow it, right? Just because the Lord predicted it doesn't mean we should sit back and say, oh, well, these things are going to happen, so it's okay. No, we have to resist these things. We must speak out. The Bible tells us in 1 Timothy chapter 2 that God wants civil authorities to act righteously so that we can lead peaceable and honest lives, right? And then it says, and God is not willing that any should perish, but would have all to come to the knowledge of the truth. You see, people coming to the knowledge of truth requires that we have the freedom to tell them the truth, that we have the ability to get the word out. So defending religious freedom it's not just good for us, it's a duty that we have, not just for our sake, but to defend, to enable the gospel to be preached. So remember, it's not just your freedom, it's the freedom of all believers and all people. And when you fight for freedom, you're not only fighting for your own, but for the freedom of the gospel itself to go forward. So this is why I'm thankful for the many organizations today who are fighting and who are standing up. And many of them we're blessed to count as strategic partners here at Truth and Liberty. And I try to make it a point to allow you to hear from many of them frequently. And one of the most important organizations anywhere in this fight is the National Religious Broadcasters Association, which I referred to a minute ago. And I'm really thrilled to have on our show today the CEO and president of NRB, Troy Miller. So Troy was elected unanimously by the board of NRB. He was elected to be their CEO and president in 2022. He has a career as a senior executive that spanned more than 30 years, and he served, even before he was elected CEO, he served as interim CEO of NRB from 2019. And upon assuming leadership during a time of financial crisis for the organization, under his leadership, they've now recaptured a strong financial position, grown their membership, and significantly increased their programming, networking, equipping, sponsorship, and other work that they do. And so it's really an honor to have him. He's the current president, as I said, also of NRB, but also of its affiliated organization, NRB TV, where he served since 2005. And he served with distinction in the United States Navy from 1983 to 1988, including time assigned to the Naval Engineering Compound at Ingalls Shipyard in Pascagoula, Mississippi, right down the coast is Pensacola. And he was part of the commissioning crew of the USS Bunker Hill. So Troy has a varied and distinguished career. He used to work for Gateway for 10 years and was involved in leading several business startups, including Gateway's expansion into Europe and Asia with new manufacturing facilities and global information technology application strategies. He also served as the vice president and chief operating officer for D. James Kennedy Ministries. And he's an expert in Christian apologetics and in training pastors and many other things. So Troy Miller is truly one of the great leaders of the church today in America and of the evangelical movement. So I'm really excited and honored to have him on the program. Let me talk a little bit more about this subject of religious freedom, if I can. I think that we have an open window in America today. We don't know how long this is going to last, but the Second Great Awakening has begun. And in conjunction with that, by God's grace, the Supreme Court of the United States has issued some incredible rulings in recent years. As Kelly Shackelford says, we now in America have more religious liberty under the rulings of the Supreme Court than we have had in 40 years, all right, going all the way back to Lemon versus Kurtzman in 1971, and even before that, the Supreme Court now is saying that we're going to look to the history of this nation, not just to this new radical concept of separation of church and state, a phrase that is not in the Constitution. Well, if you look at the history of the United States, you can see from the very beginning that Christians had a very strong and dominant influence on the trajectory of this nation in government, in public policy. In fact, it was Christian principles and the teachings of pastors and the Bible, which was the foundation of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. We've even had pastors serve as president of the United States. Right? And we've had, things like church meetings, church congregations meeting inside the U.S. Capitol under Thomas Jefferson. The largest gathering of the largest church service in the nation was in the Capitol. And we've had 1,400 official proclamations issued during the founding era alone, calling Americans to prayer, to fasting, to repentance, and so forth. The examples go on and on. John Adams, our second president of the United States, he said that it was the general principles of Christianity upon which the founders achieved independence. The unalienable rights of man, the dignity of human beings, and the role of government all come right out of the Bible, folks. And if the church remains silent in this day and this hour, we in large measure already have, lose our liberties. We will become servants of the state and prohibited from saying things that we're required to say, prohibited from speaking truth and from presenting the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let me just ask you a hypothetical question today. How far away are we in America from government saying, you must perform gay weddings, pastors? You must officiate homosexual ceremonies. You must baptize children that have been adopted by gay people, and treated as a family. You must do this and do that. They're already telling us, Christians, you can't be foster parents. Christian, you can't adopt because, you're not willing to abide by our radical ideology. They're already saying, you bake wedding cakes for a living? Well, you can't do that anymore unless you bake them for gays too, unless you participate in homosexual weddings. And on we go. We've got lots and lots of examples. Pastors are being told, you can't, open your doors and serve the poor in this area, pastor. You can't participate in this government program. You have to tear down this sign. You're using offensive speech. Did you know in the United Kingdom today, there are thousands of people in jail because of so-called hate speech on social media? How far are we in America from that? I would submit to you, not very far. We need to stand up. We need to be able to articulate the defense of our liberties. We need to not be quiet anymore. And that's why one of the reasons I'm so thankful for NRB and organizations like it. One of the things I'm going to ask Troy about in this interview coming up is a case that NRB is leading the way on. And they have filed a lawsuit challenging the Johnson Amendment. That's that thing in the tax code that says that, you're a 501c3. Well, you can't endorse or oppose candidates for public office. Well, the National Religious Broadcasters Association is saying, wait a second, pastors have a constitutional right to speak the truth, how the Bible applies to everything, including elections. So they ought to be able to talk to their congregation about which candidate is more aligned with biblical values. And they're suing over it, and they've managed to reach a settlement agreement on it that I think you're going to want to hear about. So don't go away. We're going to be right back in just a little bit with this interview of this great Christian leader, Troy Miller, who's the CEO of the National Religious Broadcasters. Before we go to the break, though, I wanted to mention to you once again our free product. It's called Who Made You God? It's this great little booklet. You could read it probably in under an hour by Andrew Wommack. And in it, it says, you'll learn in this book how to make Jesus Lord and not just Savior, how to recognize pride and humble yourself, how to stop dealing with your old sin nature, how to capture and cast down ungodly thoughts. All of that flows from making Jesus Lord of your life. But if He's really Lord of your life, you know what else is going to be true? His Word is going to be honored and revered in your heart. And you're going to treat His Word as the truth. And you're going to submit to that truth. When you really do those things, many, many blessings are going to flow your way. So go to truthandlibertygtn.com today, pick up this free gift, and we'll get it right to you. All right. So thank you so much. Sit back and we're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back with Troy Miller, the CEO and president of National Religious Broadcasters Association. Are you passionate about standing for truth in the culture, but don't know how to get started? Well, Truth and Liberty, our mission is to educate, unify, and mobilize the body of Christ to stand for truth in the public square. And as part of our mission, we provide you with an amazing array of resources on our website. And our website has just been revamped, remodeled, and retooled to be user-friendly. And I'm so excited about it because I believe that there's nothing like it out there anywhere. I want to encourage you today to go to truthandliberty.net and check out the Resources Center and the Get Equipped Center. On our Resources Center, you will find hundreds of links, hundreds of videos, articles, blogs, even America's original founding documents can be found on Truth and Liberty's Resources Center. It's searchable by topic, preset topic, or you can put in a custom search to find exactly what you need and what you're interested in. In the Get Equipped section, we link you to tools created by our strategic partners, including Pray, Vote, and Engage tools. We culture impact teams, civic action teams, biblical citizenship in modern America, biblical worldview training, and more. So go today to truthandliberty.net and find what you need to get equipped to stand for truth in the public square. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Truth and Liberty. As I promised, our special guest today is Troy Miller, the CEO of National Religious Broadcasters Association. Troy, thank you so much for joining us here on Truth and Liberty.
Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, it's great to have you, brother, and been looking forward to this. Troy, you've got a fascinating kind of career path. I think you started in the sort of the corporate world. We're working for Gateway Computers back in the day, helping them launch, internationally in Asia and all that sort of thing. And somehow you made a jump from there over into religious world, if you will. I think D. James Kennedy. How did you make that transition? What happened in your life to bring that to pass?
Yeah, it's interesting because it actually goes all the way back to my Navy days. When I was in the Navy, my grandmother had gotten saved in the late 70s, and she really looked at her grandkids as her mission field. So when I was in the Navy, she sent me a book by D. James Kennedy called Why I Believe. It was the first time I ever read apologetic about the Bible, and she sent me my first Bible, and I read that Bible so many times it came right out of the binding. And we were overseas, we're in the Persian Gulf. Well, I came back and when I got out of the Navy, I like you said, I was in the tech industry. That was kind of my background. That's where I thought I was going to be. And then my wife and I went down to a weekend at D. James Kennedy, had a weekend event we went to, and one thing led to another, and they offered me a job to come down there and be their chief operating officer, and God opened the doors because we weren't really, it was interesting. We weren't planning on moving from South Dakota with two boys to what I called Miami Vice, but God opened up the doors, and that's really what brought us into Christian ministry and into broadcasting.
Wow, that's amazing. So young people today probably don't know who D. James Kennedy is or was, but he was the pastor of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church and founder of Evangelism Explosion, and something, he really talked about government, politics, culture all the time. What was that organization he had? I'm forgetting the name at the moment.
He had a couple of them. I mean, the Coral Ridge Ministries was the media outreach there, and they had the Center for Reclaiming America with that, and they did Reclaim America conferences. And then he had the Center for Christian Statesmanship up in Washington, D.C., which was an evangelistic outreach to Capitol Hill. They ran a number of Bible studies up there for Capitol Hill staffers and other folks. And, he had a real heart for both evangelism and, as he put it, the cultural mandate, that as Christians, we have those two things that we really are called to influence within the culture is both, of course, for the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he was a great man of God, and you worked for him, COO, for a while, and then and when did you come over and start working for National Religious Broadcasters?
So in 2005, the NRB was given a television channel by DirecTV, and it was kind of use it or lose it deal. And so Frank Wright, who is also a DJ Kennedy alum, he and I were friends. Came down and he took my tech experience and startup experience, and we planned out the NRB TV channel. And then he asked me to move to Nashville and start it. And so God opened that door, and that's what brought me up to Nashville and really starting to work with the National Religious Broadcasters Association. And then in 2019, after running NRB TV, the NRB executive committee asked me to come over and help out on that side, and then made me interim CEO in 2019, and then gave me the job in 2022. So I either made somebody unhappy or somebody happy. I'm not really sure.
Well, yeah. That chances are both, right? But tell us about NRB. What is the organization? I think it's a little bit behind the scenes in some ways, and the average person average Christian in the pew or whatever may not even know what you do.
Yeah, that's right. It is kind of behind the scenes. NRB is the largest association of what we call Christian communicators. It started back in 1944 as radio emerged to be the primary mass media tool. There was a group of pastors that thought this was a great way to, share the gospel and disciple people. But even back then in 1944, the radio companies wanted to be the gatekeepers. There were some other groups that wanted to be gatekeepers. So these pastors got together at Moody Church and formed the National Religious Broadcasters Association. And the real purpose of NRB is to fight on behalf of Christian communicators to stay in the public space. So we work on the legislation and laws that are going through Capitol Hill. We work with various regulatory environments that oversee ministries and broadcast and communications businesses. Today, we also do a lot of work in corporate America, because a lot of the hostility has come from corporate America and mainstream media as well.
So, one of the things in America, we have so many, you might say, religious communicators. I like that, broadcasters. It's more than probably anywhere else in the world. Like even if you go to Europe, even, to find an actual Christian TV channel is a little bit difficult at times. So we really have a treasure here in this country. What does NRB do to help those broadcasters, and what kind of services do you provide?
Yeah, of course. First of all, like I said, a number of things. We kind of what we call three pillars. We have our advocacy pillar, looks at all the legislation that comes through to make sure there's nothing that's going to restrict our free speech rights and freedom of religion rights and free exercise thereof. So we make sure that all the legislation that's coming through, if any of those components are in it, we're immediately up on the Hill talking to people about it. But the big one too is the regulatory. The Federal Communications Commission oversees most broadcasters. We have a great FCC right now. They've done an outstanding job of deregulating, making a better business environment for television broadcasters, radio broadcasters, television, radio content producers, all the above, and even church media. People don't realize that church media is affected by the laws and rules and regulations that come out of the FCC. So those are ones we work on. We help equip and encourage broadcasters, communicators. We do that primarily through a number of methods, but the biggest is our annual convention, the NRB conference. It's the International Conference of Christian Media that we held. It'll be in Nashville, Tennessee this year in February 17th through the 20th, but it's the largest gathering of Christian communicators. And we share latest trends that are going on in technology, where the environment might be moving, what's new in fundraising, how do you reach donors this year. And then last year, we had a number of workshops on artificial intelligence. So AI is a big thing for Christian communicators. And then we also will have the leading people talking about the key cultural issues that are going on around freedom of religion and freedom of speech.
Well, I was saying in my monologue, you didn't get to hear it, Troy, but that I remember the first time I walked into the exhibit hall at the NRB convention, and I was just blown away by the magnitude of it and by the number of Christian media sources out there and all the myriad of related ministries that either supported, assisted, or have some connection to Christian broadcasting. It really is incredible. Yeah, so I just wanted to give you kudos for that. It's amazing what you're doing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of entities out there that are on the support side of Christian broadcasting, and like I said today, we started off as a radio, organization, and moved into television, and now Christian film, Christian publishers, authors, podcasters, YouTube channels, bloggers, TikTokers. All of those are kind of fall under our roof. Along with churches that are doing any kind of communication. So we're out there to keep them moving forward. Whatever ministry God's called them into, our job is to make sure they can do it freely in the public.
Well, amen. The other thing I said in my monologue was, I remember when I first got saved, and Christian TV was basically TBN. There might have been, I don't know, maybe one or two, maybe Church Channel or something back then, but that was pretty much it. I mean, D. James Kennedy was on there, Jan and Paul and all that. Has the field, because of the internet age, just exploded in terms of sources of Christian broadcasting?
Yeah, it really has. I mean, as you said, cable, networks and television was out there. There's probably about a half a dozen major Christian TV networks now that have more than one station across the country there. But there's also been a big rise in cable networks, Christian cable networks. And then, of course, today we're seeing all of the rise in, individual digital channels that are out there, whether it's on YouTube or X or other social media platforms. And it really is kind of a sign of the times, because, when I started in broadcasting, and look, that's 25 years ago. So it seems like, that's not too far back. You were talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars to be able to get into this, arena. And today you can do it for hundreds of dollars. There are people running whole YouTube channels just on their iPhones that are out there today, and they're doing great work.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. So it's really an amazing time to be in the ministry and a part of what God is doing. But let me flip back. You were talking about how you guys monitor legislation and regulations and keep an eye on all that stuff. What are the big threats to religious freedom today, especially from the broadcasting side of things?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest threats today, are people just not understanding, how vast our coverage is and how big our audience is. We did a survey back in January with the Barna Group, and we were trying to basically I wanted to set a benchmark of Christian broadcasting. And we found out that 60% of the general public tunes into Christian broadcasting at some regular time. And that was huge. And so we've been telling Congress about that, because with all the changes in distribution, with, I thought, if you've heard the term cord cutting, if people have heard that term, people that are, getting rid of their subscription service video and just going to some digital service, there's a big challenge for Christians of how to work in that space, because we had a lot of protections in the broadcast world. So that's one we're working on that's very critical. And right along with that is just even on the radio side, with technology change, some people looked at AM radio as antiquated and said nobody listens to it. Well, 80 million people still listen to it, and the top genre on it is Christian talk and teach that's out there, in conservative talk. And so we've been fighting with a bill going through Congress called the AM in Every Dash bill to keep AM radio in the cars, at least for a long enough time to work a proper transition rather than just have it drop out. So those are some of the things that we really have to watch on Capitol Hill today is how Congress looks at the changing landscape of communications. Tesla just announced a few weeks ago that they would not be including FM radio in their newer models as well. Their new entry models won't have it. And then GM, General Motors, announced that they will no longer allow CarPlay, Apple CarPlay, or Android Auto to run in there. So there's a real fight. This is how it gets really complicated. There's a fight for what's called the connected dash. And so that's your dashboard in your car. Every car now has its own cellular radio equipment in it so that that car can hook up to a cellular service and get data and information. And the car companies want to be the new gatekeepers of that information. They want to sell you the subscription. And then, of course, along with that, they want to track all of your data and all of your habits, your driving habits, where you go, what businesses you pass by, because that information is worth billions of dollars today on the ad sell market to get out there. So we have two big issues going on with AM radio. One is just a religious freedom issue and the right to have free over-the-air broadcasting for the consumer. And then the other one that we're fighting is a real privacy issue. And this is not only in the car companies, but as you know, we talked at the earlier, all you have to do is talk today about something. Oh, I'd like to have new drapes. And next thing you know, you got 100 ads for new drapes or blinds or whatever it is you're looking for. And so we have a real privacy issue today. We know that was weaponized in the last administration. So that's an issue we're really keeping our thumb on.
Yeah, for sure. These things don't seem like a big deal when the government's friendly to you, but as soon as it becomes unfriendly, boy, then you've got a very serious problem. Why do we need to be concerned about losing AM and FM radio?
Well, look, again, it's free access. It's consumer choice. Look at the problems we've had with the big social media companies, with Meta and Google and their platforms, and Facebook out there. We've had all kinds of censorship and cancellation going on there. Where now, if we don't have access to free over-the-air radio for the consumers, then they're going to be at the mercy of who the car companies want to allow in for apps. So let's say that you have an app that gets this program. Maybe they don't like something you talk about on this program. They can just take that app out of their app store and no longer have access to it. So that's the issue that we're fighting with on why it's important to keep AM and FM radio in the car and give consumers the choice. Don't set up any more gatekeepers out there. The auto companies don't need to be the new gatekeepers of information, since we spend a lot of time driving.
Yeah, let's not do that, please. Troy, what about this? I mean, AM radio, FM radio, television, airwaves, traditional, broadcasting over the airwaves, not the internet. It's regulated, right? We have the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, because we realize this is a public space and it needs to stay open, and we need to have some standards here of decency and other things like that, but also, free access, like you were talking about. What about doing that to social media or to the internet? Is NRB in favor of that? I know people love sort of the jungle atmosphere out there where Facebook can censor you, and YouTube, well, they hate that part, but they love we can have whatever content we want and no one can stop us. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting question and thought, because as you said, I mean, for the most part, we're all for a limited government, but we're not for no government. Government has a role to play, and it has a regulatory role to play as well. And a lot of that regulatory role is about keeping the playing field fair for everybody. We already know we have too many large conglomerates on the communication side, which really control the access to everything and trying to push everybody out of the market. So we're actually all for the government stepping in with some regulations on the new digital platforms. The Congress, when the first radio act put together, and then again in the Television Act and the Cable Act and the Satellite Act, there was always what was called a public interest section in there. In other words, there was a need for the public interest, okay, to get some protections by the federal government, so they weren't just squeezed out totally by the commercial enterprises. We think that kind of legislation needs to go into the digital platforms as well, so that these large digital, commercial platforms that are all about, revenue and making money, don't squeeze out the public interest programming, and religious programming is one of the areas that falls underneath that, along with other educational kinds of programs.
Yeah. But what would that look like in the internet space? Is there a danger that, just kind of like what we were talking about? Yeah, but when the next administration comes in, or whatever, and anti-Christian sentiment grows, that they're going to censor us, that they're going to say you can't say these things, that's hate speech, and so forth.
So we think that the legislation ought to mirror the same legislation that's currently active in the broadcasting world. And in the broadcasting world, this is what made it so much of a problem of the weaponization in the last administration, because the law actually says that the Federal Communications Commission cannot be involved on the content side. They can be involved on the technology, they can be involved in the distribution paths, they can be involved in things like pricing, but they can't get involved in content. In other words, they can't decide whose content is good and whose isn't. They have a Decency Act in there that hasn't been enforced for at least a couple of decades, but decency was the only thing that the Federal Communications Commission get involved in. We think that same kind of legislation that has worked for 40 years plus on the television side and the radio, satellite, and cable, we think that same legislation should work just fine in the digital world as well.
Well, that's really interesting. Is there any support for that in Congress that you know of?
There's growing support in Congress. We've been starting to talk about this because I think Congress is starting to see, as the digital areas move forward, I think they're starting to see that there really are winners and then losers. And the losers right now are the educational programs. They can't compete on the same footing as the commercial folks in there. That's why Congress gave them special carve-outs to begin with. And so those carve-outs we really should look at this as the same kind of distribution that we have today on the cable systems, and really implement those same kind of regulations. And look, the commission has talked about it, and several members of the House Energy Committee have also started to talk about it. So I think it's going to be a growing issue over the next year or so.
With the new Trump administration, there was some serious attention paid to PBS, Public Broadcasting System, underwritten by government money, and yet they're farther left than Karl Marx. And I'm wondering, how do we keep that from happening as well? If there's going to be a carve out for education, are we basically propping up left-wing stuff, or is it something different that you're talking about?
It's different than we're talking about. So when the government carved out space for the public interest, what they said was that there was a set aside for the number of licenses and channels that would be used for educational purposes, and not all of those channels were PBS or NPR kind of channels. NPR and PBS were set out as a different carve outs in the legislation, and we've been fighting that. I've been fighting that since I got in for years, saying to have PBS get a special kinds of accommodations over the top of everybody else was just simply wrong. And also, as you said, look, if you're going to take public funding and you say that you represent, by taking that public funding, you represent all of the public, well, 90% of your program can't be, such as it only represents a small portion of the public that's out there. And so that was the big battle for the PBS funding and the corporate for what's called public broadcasting. We don't see that coming back. We just see the FCC saying that the access to these places should be on an equal footing.
Well, Troy, one of the things that NRB has done most recently that I'm just a cheerleader for is, of course, you've got an amazing new general counsel in Mike Farris. Mike used to lead Alliance Defending Freedom and has done so much for so many Christian organizations and for freedom in general. But you guys are one of the plaintiffs in a case in federal court that is challenging what's called the Johnson Amendment. First off, can you just explain what is this all about?
Yeah, so Lyndon B. Johnson, back when he was running for Senate in Texas back in the 1950s, he was actually opposed by a number of organizations, including churches, that didn't support his candidacy. So when he was elected, he ended up in charge of the majority in the Senate. He attached an amendment to one of the bills, the appropriations bills that was going through, that became known as the Johnson Amendment. This amendment did three major things. It said that nonprofit entities, that's 501c3 organizations as designated by the Internal Revenue Service, they can't give financially to campaigns. They can't endorse or oppose candidates of campaigns, and then they can only do a certain amount of lobbying that they do. Now, Johnson said he did this to curb what he said were communist NGOs, nonprofit organizations, but the real truth is he was silencing the churches that had opposed his candidacy because otherwise you wouldn't have the endorsement. So this has silenced the church since the 1950s. This has been a real thing over the heads of all the pastors out there to be able to talk about that. And look, for 170 years, pastors talked about candidates. They talked about issues. They talked about what was going on, why elections were important. So we took the IRS to court along with two churches and another organization, Intercessors for America, to get this overturned. It actually started a year ago under the Biden administration, where we had to fight the IRS and the Justice Department lawyers who kept trying to get the case basically thrown out. We made it past that into the Trump administration, and now we're getting ready to go into a hearing in a couple of weeks here, where we hope the judge is going to hear the case out, and then we might get a ruling on it. So that's where we're at with this case. But what it would do is it would free the pastors up to be able to speak about candidates and about election issues in their churches and their normal communications platforms.
Well, Troy, if you prevail in this, which I fully expect you will, but if you prevail in that and the IRS really reinterprets the Johnson Amendment so it doesn't apply to pastors in their normal communications, what's that going to mean for America? What's that going to mean for the church in America?
Well, look, for the church in America, what it means for pastors who feel like it is their obligation as a pastor, as a shepherd, it means that they can now follow their conscience, their religious conscience, and talk about these issues without fear of the government's reprisal on them. And so hopefully that means that more pastors will shepherd their people on these key issues that we know come around every election. Because look, politics isn't a side one-way road. Politics is constantly swerving into the areas that we hold sacred and the values and the morals that we hold sacred. And pastors should be able to talk about that with a clear conscience. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I'm saying that if this goes through, here's what I'm saying. All right, pastors, you can't hide behind the Johnson Amendment anymore. You got to start speaking out. So hopefully it will make a huge difference. I believe that it will. So let me ask you this, though. This idea that many pastors have, Troy, I just want to hit on this for a second. I used to work for D. James Kennedy. I mean, he was extremely outspoken. Many pastors these days say, oh, that's not my job. I don't talk about politics, or I don't talk about political issues, and this sort of thing. I just preach the gospel and so on. Do you think that's a biblical mindset, or can you comment on that? Do we need to have a little bit of reformation in the church these days?
We need to have a lot of reformation in the church today on this. Again, I said for 170 years that was not in this country the thought across pulpits around the country. Pulpits often and pastors were some of the most fiery supporters and opposition for certain candidates that were out there because pastors knew that their role was to shepherd and not simply to shepherd within the four walls of their churches, but to shepherd in such a way as to guide the governance of this country. I mean, who, as a pastor, would think that you could just sort of step back and say, it's okay to let the pagans rule the country? That's okay. I'm just worried about the gospel. And especially today, because I think, look, for a long time, government really wasn't involved in as many social issues as they've been in recent times, really since the Great Depression and on. The government has gotten involved in a lot of areas that were traditionally the church's areas to get involved in. Charity, families, marriage, divorce, sexuality, all of that was the churches and not the governments. Now the government's gotten involved in all of those things, and they're in some sense, if you don't shepherd as a pastor, the government's going to shepherd in that pastor's position. Right. And I don't think we're called as pastors to advocate to give up that kind of role to the government.
Yeah. I think there's an old saying that says power abhors a vacuum. Somebody's going to do that. Something is going to step into that. And if we go silent, then, the voice of the enemy is going to be fill the gap.
Yeah, and we've allowed, for whatever reason, this is never. You go back in church history. Church history has always pushed against the culture. Christianity has always changed every culture it's been inserted into. It has changed that culture for the good. Right. It has ended terrible pagan kinds of rituals and practices that went on in various places, and it's always been an influence, a positive influence of the culture. That's why we're called to be salt and light, right? Because we're going to be that influence. So I think we really need to, step back and look at how we think about that. We've let the left control the rhetoric, and somehow we think that because it's called politics, it's something that's outside of the church's privy, where, look, the Bible clearly tells us to appoint godly leaders. And I don't think he just meant godly leaders of the church. I think he means godly leaders of the people as well and of the country.
Amen. Well, we're living now, Troy, in the post Charlie Kirk age. Charlie being brutally, assassinated last September. And it seems as if Kirk's killing, things were already, we were already seeing some violence manifest from pro-abortion people and trans people and other stuff like this. And I don't mean to castigate any group of people, but from the vantage point of national religious broadcasters and your seat there, do you have concerns about restrictions on our freedom of speech going forward, coming from radical leftist elements, either by violence and intimidation, or maybe ultimately government action and hate speech, like what is going rampant in Great Britain right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Great Britain and somewhat across Europe, and of course to our neighbors in Canada in the north. Right now, the hate speech and the thought police are on overdrive in those areas. And yeah, I do have concern, and we have a lot of concern about that. And along with the radical rise of Islam across the country as well, I think we have a lot of things that are against us. Look, the left, I think, understands one thing, and I think this is why they really actually hate this president and this administration so much, is that the real wall standing in their way, the real obstacle is the church. Mm-hmm. And it is the faith that people have that there's a higher power than the government, and that people have a meaning and a purpose there. And look, that has stopped the progressive left over and over again. It certainly stopped them this time around. And so the hate for the church, the attack we've seen on Christian schools, Christian churches across this country, as you said, on pro-life people who are just praying or demonstrating out there for that cause. I think those are all on the rise across the country, and the rhetoric is not toned down at all. The rhetoric has become, if anything, it's become even more violent, calling for attacks and for violence. So this is a major concern that we're going to have to continue to deal with.
Well, how do we deal with this? I know you see talking heads say, "Oh, tone down the rhetoric, tone down the rhetoric," and yet that's on one side of their mouth. On the other side, they're going to political rallies and things like that and saying what people want to hear. And we sort of have this echo chamber problem all throughout America today, where everybody's hearing what they want to hear, but we're not really talking to each other. Do you have any thoughts on that? How do we calm things down?
Yeah, we do. We do have to figure out how to get dialogue going again. It seems like we become so polarized. But look, I think for us as Christians, the first thing we have to remember is that this is a spiritual warfare.
Amen.
This is a warfare that's going on, as we would say, behind the scenes in the unseen places against the principalities and the powers of this world. We know that the Satan and his forces are behind that. We as the church have to be two things. One, we have to be in prayer for all of this. We have to be praying for all the leaders, people that are on the front lines, people that are battling this on a daily basis. We need to be covering them in prayer. And two, we have to be working on unity. The Bible tells us that Satan comes to divide, right? To separate, to disunify things. We've let too many things in the church separate us. We've been working on this for the last several years at NRB to bring more peace and unity to the church. I think we've seen that at our conferences lately. We've just seen a lot of people. It's great to see people from multiple different denominational or theological backgrounds sitting at tables together, talking through these issues. And the best is if you come to an NRB, see a group of people in the hallways praying for one another. And so those are the two things I think we really have to be us as church leaders, and church to be at the first and foremost of our actions is to be praying and to be working on unity. And then I think you would agree with me. We have to put that to action, as James would tell us. We have to put our faith to action. We can't set aside anymore. I don't think any of us ever. I didn't dream in my lifetime I would ever be fighting for kindergartners not to be over sexualized, for kindergartners to be taught about transgenderism and to be taught about the LGBTQ world. I never would have thought of that today, but we sat back and we really didn't think this would ever happen. Well, it's happening now, and we really have to step up and get into these battles to help people who are lost.
Troy, let's talk about a couple other things before we get to the end here. One, just real quick, want to hit on the subject of AI, which you touched on, had some sessions at your last conference on, but AI just seems to be getting more and more popular and more powerful. What angles are you looking at it from the NRB perspective? I know we've got a big freedom issue. We've also got copyright. Do we have authenticity risks here when it comes to ministry using AI?
I think we do. I think we have some real tough questions to ask. We're putting together some groups right now to talk about the ethical side of the use of AI in ministry. What does that do? I saw somebody recently, it was a COO who's hired the first CEO, who's hired the first AI COO. Are we going to hire, AI assistant pastors or counselors or all of those sort of things? And then we have all the problems with AI too. AI is look, I came tech world. AI is only, I mean, it can do a lot of things fast in that, but it still has bias in it because it's
Yeah.
run by people in the background, by programmers and people put together. So there's the production side of AI that can help us a lot, but we have to think about the ministry side of AI and the ethics of doing AI ministry.
Well, do you think that NRB might at some point be a part of creating some model guidelines or anything along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we're working on now is a kind of code of ethics for AI. We're working with several Christian colleges and universities on this, as well as some AI companies to come up with this kind of code of conduct for AI and ministry.
Do you think, have we missed an opportunity? Is the window closing, or because it's becoming so big now, but can Congress and should Congress enact some regulation on AI?
You know, that's a good question of where Congress can do this. I think the problem is that it's moving so fast. It's the speed of AI right now that I think Congress is having a hard time with. You know, legislation doesn't happen overnight. By the time they put legislation together, they're doing it on obsolete technology. So they need to come up with some general guidelines. I know there are several senators working on this, but I'm afraid that Congress isn't going to be able to keep up with the fast moving technology.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a threat, a scary proposition there. But so one of the things that the best things I've seen in the last sort of 5 years, maybe 6 years, Troy, is sort of I just say the increased quality and distribution of Christian entertainment media. Have you guys seen that as well? I mean, we've had some really great Christian movies. You know, I remember Abby Johnson's Unplanned. You know, they tried to shut that down, but they didn't succeed, and it was just really good. We have Jesus Revolution that came out a couple of years ago. I thought that was a fantastic film. And, you know, The Chosen and some other stuff like that. Does that field come sort of under your rubric a little bit at least? And does that excite you? And what do you have to say about that?
It does. It does come. We work with a lot of those studios and a lot of those organizations. The Chosen was launched at NRB 2019 in California.
Wow.
It was their first episodes that they screened for it. And look, I think part of it is that one, the price points for producing programming and these quality entertainment has really come down. But God's also blessed us with some fabulous studios that have started up in these arenas. Here to produce these programs. I think we're going to see even more of this because I see some of the things some of the younger generation is now producing with these tools that they have that they can do it, and I think some of it's going to be fantastic. There's a new thing out there called Micro Series. It's coming over from the East. It's these it's where they produce like a full program, but they release it in 90 seconds to 2-minute episodes. And it's really popular amongst the Gen Zers and the alphas to do these because they're watching everything on their phone and on the fly, so they can watch 3 or 4 episodes and then come back to it. I know there's some folks out there now looking at producing some good quality Christian content in these genres. So I'm excited for where we're at in the Christian entertainment industry for both short form television kind of programming and long form theatrical pieces. I really think we're going to see a lot of good stuff coming out in the next several years.
Well, that's really cool. Just the thought of that gives me a feeling of ADD, though. I'm not sure I like the Micro Series thing. Imagine watching a film. Anyway, Troy, we're out of time, brother, and I just want to thank you again for coming on the show. It's been great having you, and you got to come back sometime.
Anytime. Thank you guys for having me.
All right. We encourage all our viewers to check NRB out online. If you are a broadcaster or interested in becoming one, be sure to join as well. And also be sure to take advantage of our free product offer today, Andrew's booklet, Who Made You God? It's not about what it feels like. It's about making Jesus Lord of your life and what that means in a practical sense and the benefits that flow when we do. So check that out at truthandlibertygtn.com today and get a free copy. God bless you all. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time here on Truth and Liberty.